This is the story of the Israeli war that killed 241 American lives. The primary catalyst that dragged the United States military into the theater was the 1982 Israeli invasion of Lebanon, an intervention that fundamentally reshaped the American defense establishment. What began as a peacekeeping mission rapidly spiraled into a strategic nightmare, eventually culminating in the single deadliest day for the U.S. Marine Corps. Welcome back to American Warfare. Today, we are looking at Operation Peace for Galilee, the shattered illusions of the multinational force, and the tragic dawn of asymmetric warfare in Beirut, Lebanon. The immediate catalyst that dragged the United States into the theater was the Israeli invasion of Lebanon on Sunday, June 6, 1982, dubbed Operation Peace for Galilee. A massive force of 40,000 Israeli troops and hundreds of tanks rolled across the southern border. Their objective was clear: eradicate the Palestine Liberation Organization, PLO, expel the occupying Syrian army, and install a pro-Israeli Christian government in Beirut. The Israeli advance was overwhelming, rapidly encircling West Beirut and trapping thousands of PLO fighters, Syrian troops, and Lebanese civilians in a brutal siege for the United States. This was an acute geopolitical trap. Syria was heavily backed by the Soviet Union. A protracted confrontation between Israel and Syria risked drawing the two Cold War superpowers into a proxy war. To defuse the crisis, American diplomats brokered a ceasefire to safely evacuate the PLO. The PLO demanded international guarantees for their safety. It was exactly this diplomatic necessity that dragged the American military into the Lebanese quagmire. In August 1982, the multinational force was officially formed. The U.S. sent 800 Marines ashore under the strict premise that they were neutral peacekeepers, not combatants, operating alongside French and Italian units. The Marines successfully supervised the PLO evacuation, considering their strictly defined mission accomplished. The Marines withdrew, viewing the operation as a textbook success, but the illusion of stability evaporated instantly. Just 4 days after the American withdrawal, the newly elected Lebanese president was assassinated in a massive bomb blast. In swift retaliation, Christian militias entered the Sabra and Shatila refugee camps and systematically massacred over 1,000 unarmed Palestinians. Lebanon was descending into total chaos. Bowing to immense diplomatic pressure, the United States ordered the Marines back to Beirut. This second deployment was doctrinally flawed from the start. The official mandate was to establish an ambiguous presence to support the Lebanese armed forces. But because the Lebanese government was heavily dominated by Christian factions, the U.S. fundamentally compromised its neutrality. To the excluded Muslim factions, the Marines were now seen as active combatants, propping up a hostile regime. Furthermore, the Marines were hamstrung by paralyzing rules of engagement. Categorized strictly as non-combatants, they operated under condition for weapons unloaded, magazines in pouches. They were ordered to project strength while being denied the fundamental military right to aggressive self-defense, realizing they could not defeat the American military in a conventional firefight. On April 18, 1983, a suicide bomber drove a stolen delivery van into the front lobby of the United States Embassy in West Beirut. The vehicle was laden with 2,000 pounds of TNT. The resulting detonation sheared the entire front facade off the building, killing 63 people, including 17 Americans. The attack killed 8 CIA employees, functionally blinding American intelligence collection in the region. It was a tectonic shift in warfare. The enemy had introduced a suicide vehicle-borne improvised explosive device, bypassing conventional military perimeters to inflict massive strategic damage. By September, the security environment collapsed. The Lebanese army struggled to hold strategic positions in the hills above the airport. Facing the collapse of the government, the U.S. crossed the Rubicon from neutral peacekeeper to active belligerent U.S. Navy. Destroyers off the coast unleashed a withering bombardment against anti-government positions inland. The United States was now officially at war. Sunday, October 23, 1983, at the Beirut International Airport, Reveille was delayed by an hour. Hundreds of Marines, sailors, and soldiers were asleep in their 4-story concrete headquarters. At 6:22 a.m., a 19-ton yellow Mercedes-Benz truck bypassed a public parking lot and accelerated through a barbed wire entanglement. The sentries, adhering strictly to their condition for rules of engagement, had their weapons unloaded. In the critical seconds required to chamber a round, they were unable to unleash lethal fire to halt the accelerating vehicle. The truck crashed straight into the lobby and detonated. The payload consisted of gas-enhanced military explosives, equivalent to an astonishing 12,000 pounds of TNT. The immense overpressure lifted the entire four-story concrete building on its foundations before the supporting pillars sheared, instantly crushing the men trapped inside. Minutes later, a second suicide truck bomb targeted the French contingent, killing 58 paratroopers. The American death toll stood at 241 military personnel. Rescue operations commenced within minutes under harrowing conditions, frequently hindered by hostile sniper and artillery fire directed at the rescuers from the surrounding hills. The aftermath triggered intense investigations into institutional failures. The Long Commission found that tactical commanders were virtually flooded with vague warnings of terrorist threats, creating a cognitive numbness that left them unable to adopt effective defensive postures. Retaliation was a disaster. A December airstrike against Syrian positions was severely micromanaged by Washington, resulting in 2 downed American jets and the capture of Navy Lieutenant Robert Goodman, who was only freed weeks later after a rogue diplomatic mission by civil rights leader Jesse Jackson. By early 1984, the Lebanese armed forces disintegrated along sectarian lines. Confronted with irrefutable evidence that the mission had failed, President Ronald Reagan ordered a withdrawal. To cover the retreating Marines, the battleship USS New Jersey unleashed the most devastating naval bombardment since the Vietnam War, firing massive 16-inch shells into the mountains. However, using destabilized World War II-era gunpowder, the strikes were highly inaccurate, scattering indiscriminate destruction across the landscape by July 1984. The multinational force had completely vanished. But the trauma of Beirut forced radical, permanent changes upon the American defense establishment. The disaster led directly to the formulation of the Weinberger Doctrine 6, rigorous imperatives demanding clear political objectives, wholehearted intent, and overwhelming force before ever committing U.S. troops. Abroad, the operational dysfunction witnessed in Lebanon also served as a primary catalyst for the Goldwater-Nichols Act of 1986, which radically simplified the military chain of command to prevent Washington from micromanaging frontline operations. Finally, recognizing the terrifying reality of asymmetric warfare, the lessons of Beirut played the foundational role in the establishment of the United States Special Operations Command in 1987. The 1983 barracks bombing was the tragic opening salvo of the global war on terror. It proved incontrovertibly that state-sponsored asymmetric terrorism could successfully dictate terms to a global superpower lesson paid, foreign blood, by 241 American service members. Thanks for watching this episode of American Warfare. If you found this breakdown of the 1982 Lebanon crisis insightful, hit that like button, subscribe to the channel.
No words that can express our sorrow and grief over the loss of those splendid young men and the injury to so many others. I know there are no words also that can ease the burden of grief for the families of those young men.